day 3 of the conference. Eager to hear about fraud and identity again. Hopefully this is interesting. So my name is Hrishi Talwar. I run product for Equifax, focused on mobile and digital identity. And we've got a pretty good panel here. And what we really want to talk about is what's really going on with the evolution of fraud as we're seeing it from the business side of things. And what are some of the techniques that all of us are employing today to help fight or prevent fraud? And it'll be very interesting to get a perspective from our panelists on how do we see this trending or changing over the next 2 to 3 years. I really don't want to go beyond that because you never know what we're going to be doing 3 years from now, especially with respect to identity and fraud prevention. And obviously, the fraudsters are always trying to play catch up. So you've always got to have one step ahead of them. So hopefully it's a good discussion. No slides. So what I'll do now is maybe go through the panel, and we do have an empty chair. We were supposed to get someone from Forder that would have brought a pretty interesting perspective, but the gentleman fell ill. So we're down to just 3 or 4 of us. So I'll start off with Jason. You just go through.
Hey folks, thanks for making it out. I know it's last day, so we'll try to make this worth your while. I'm Jason. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sift. We power trust and safety for leading digital businesses using a large-scale real-time machine learning system. And I'm happy to talk more about how that works and how we see that trending.
Hello everyone. Ryan Gosling. So firstly, apologies anyone who's expecting the Hollywood movie star. Instead you got the low-budget British version.
Just as handsome.
I know. Thanks very much. So I work for a company called Callsign. So we're focused on intelligent-driven authentication. So I think we're kind of moving from a stage now. It's not about what you know. It's not about username, password. It's actually around what you do. So we look at things like device, behavior, and location of the individual to essentially build trust.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lincoln. I'm the founder and CEO of IDwall, and we help companies in Latin America to automate the onboarding process for new users. So document validation, ID verification, background check, all in one platform. And we're the leading player in Latin America, working with companies like banks, car rental companies, marketplace, and others. And my goal here is to bring this Latin American perspective because we suffer a lot with that. Brazil is the second country that suffers the most with identity fraud in the world. So we need to be really ahead of everything to avoid these problems.
Thanks, guys. So, as you can see, pretty good panel, right? We've got information coming in from the US, from Europe, and now the emerging market as well. Because we're starting to see that convergence. I think fraud rates are starting to converge. I was looking at some stats earlier this morning. 1 in every 3 people in the US and in the UK have had a fraud alert show up within the last year on their profile. And that's pretty alarming, right? Because if you think about all the stuff that we are doing online, whether we are going through a commerce experience or we're going through a sign-up experience or trying to log into some account we have, how do we make sure that as we are adopting all of these digital channels, that we've got the right checks and controls in place so people are only being allowed to go in if they rightfully own that relationship, and it's not someone that's going in through account takeover or some of the other options out there. So it'll be good for us to just get a perspective, starting with you, maybe Colin, around what are some of the trends that you're seeing in Brazil? I think you mentioned it's got the highest rates of identity and fraud happening there within your country and the emerging market in general. So what are some of the other trends that you're seeing that are pretty alarming?
Okay, perfect. So just to give a little bit more about background, I decided to start IDwall because back in 2011, I was helping to create the first 100% digital bank in Brazil. And we were struggling a lot with this kind of challenge, like how to avoid identity fraud, how to ensure compliance like KYC and anti-money laundering, and how to do that in a very seamless way without impacting the user experience. Because when you're doing this online, you expect to open a bank account in seconds and start using it. In the real world, it doesn't happen that way. So if you try to use the old structures, you're gonna fail. So, and there's a recent research that we are publishing that shows that the GDP growth of a country is correlated with how much people trust each other in that specific country. And There we have a huge problem, and that's because when you don't have trust, you start to add in red tapes and bureaucracy and friction. So I don't trust you, so I need you to notarize your signature every time you're gonna do something. I don't trust you, so I'm gonna increase the interest rates. So I make sure that I'm getting my money back. And we have a specific problem in Brazil. That's when you rent a car with fake ID, not even the insurance covers this car for the company. So they're increasing the rates for everyone that is trying to rent a car. So this is one of the things that I see in Brazil, that's this lack of trust. And sometimes I see companies trying to add a lot of friction on the process to avoid these problems, but I don't think that's the way. And actually, another trend that I see is the government trying to be responsible for that and say, okay, we're gonna help you guys, and we're gonna take care of that. And sometimes, even in here, we say that India Aadhaar system was great, or China, the Stochastic systems of social score is good. But I don't think that this trend is a good one, because when you are involved in the government, you have many different things regarding privacy and other things that are really important to look at. So I think that the trend that we need to follow is the government is going to regulate things like with GDPR and everything, and the companies are going to build a system to enhance this process. So.
Right. And so that's very interesting, because as you're seeing, because of some of these issues, we're putting every consumer in the same bucket, right? We start off treating all of them as fraudsters, and then we take them through a sequence of steps, and about 60, 70, 80, whatever that number is, percent come out as the good consumer, and the bad guys are stuck in there. But it begs the question, right? Why would you treat everyone as a bad guy? Why don't you start the other way around and start treating them as good people and figure out what checks you can put into place to just filter out the bad guys? So what do you see, Ryan, within your industry around that?
So Callsign's headquarters in London, and we've got customers across the globe, but primarily our customers are banks. So imagine all of us in the room, we have a bank account, right? So we're all at certain risks. So when we kind of look at what the challenge at the moment, I think it's a great point as well around the kind of the authentication process, because there's always a dial. So if I twist it too far towards higher risk, then actually the customer has a poor customer user experience. They have to go through a lot of friction. Too much the other way, then actually the customer's at risk. But they may then go through too quickly a process, and actually then the customer's defrauded. So I think there's always that balance that we're all working on. In terms of kind of the core challenges that we've got, primarily in the UK actually, I think is data breaches. So sort of rewinding 3 or 4 years ago, a data breach would probably be a large organisation, the Facebook, etc., being attacked. But actually, they've got the money and investment and time to actually start enhancing all their fraud controls. So actually, they are secure. So what the fraudsters started to do now is actually target smaller companies. So examples I always give is, I've got username and passwords, and actually I work in industry, but I might have similar information in some of my other smaller apps, my Starbucks. So if I'm a fraudster, why would I try and target a large organisation like a bank who's got a lot of security controls? I target these smaller organisations who have my name, address, my card details. So what they're starting to see now is the fraudsters really target these smaller companies. They then get all this information which they can actually reuse to then attack a bank or even manipulate the customer. And that's kind of the second point, which is social engineering. So social engineering is where a fraudster will contact a customer, primarily by phone, and actually manipulate them. So they'll pretend to be from the police or bank and say, look, you've got a problem in your bank account, you need to transfer all your money right now to a safe account. So this has been going on for a while, and it's often very, very difficult to detect this because it's often the customer executing the payment. So when we talk about things like biometrics, if I get a phone call from the fraudster pretending to be from the bank, and we say, look, Ryan, you need to transfer all your money to a safe account, then it's the same device that I'm using at the same location and often the same user behaviour. So that is a huge challenge, and to put that in perspective, fraud in the UK last year was £2.8 billion of attempted fraud. We managed to stop 1.6, but that's still a huge problem that we've got. In terms of social engineering and how you tackle that, it's a really interesting one because we're talking about trust here, but it is a mindset. And previous to Callsign, I actually worked at Lloyds Bank in London. And when we're kind of going through the fraud process with customers, it's really interesting where customers who have been victim of fraud are actually more happy to go for authentication. They've felt that pain because it's a feeling, right? If you are a victim of fraud, it's not a nice experience. So it's really interesting that actually those customers are then better educated and actually understand fraud and what it's about and the security. Whereas the flip side, if you haven't been victim of fraud, you're kind of a bit more blasé, and actually you look at security in a lot more of a casual perspective. So what we're doing at Callsign now is not just sort of the educational piece for our customers, but if it is the customer executing a payment, then actually there are trends in the data. So if I am on the phone to a fraudster pretending to be from a bank, there's actually some really interesting data points in there. So am I on the phone? If I've got two phones, a landline and a mobile, and both of those are engaged, could that potentially be that I'm on the phone to a fraudster? It's also session time. So if I'm logged into my internet banking, I'm making a payment, normally I'm just on my own making a payment. But actually, if I'm on the phone to a fraudster, your session length is actually longer. But it's not just about one or two of those attributes, it's about combining those together and actually laying the approach.
Right. Yeah, but that's a very interesting thing. So, Jason, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think something we think a lot about is how organizations are often siloed in their approach to solving a lot of the challenges that you have all heard about this week. I think that it starts with having the teams, the marketing and product teams that are focused on growth and delightful customer experiences and frictionless customer experiences, connecting more through shared objectives and just communication and alignment of incentives with the risk teams and the identity teams and the finance teams that are focused on protecting the business against bad actors. And so we see that often organizations need to reimagine how these teams work together just to even make a dent in solving this problem well. It's really, for us, we focus on the conjunction of trust and safety. It's not trust or safety. And so, once you have that organizational mindset, then you can start making the right product decisions, technical investments to raise the bar on both sides of the equation. And just to double down what Lincoln said, I think one phrase I've been toying around with is this idea that we're all paying a trust tax on the internet. We just entered our password 20 minutes ago. We have to re-enter it again. We have to come up with a complicated password to meet some crazy requirement. We have to answer the phone to prove that we are who we say we are. We have to, match the street numbers to this image to prove that we're not a robot. This is the default internet that we are living in. And I think it's crazy that that's what we are accepting as consumers and as businesses. I think we can do a lot better. And so for us at Sift, our vision was born out of what we had seen was possible at companies like Google and Amazon and Facebook, where we were software engineers. We had seen those companies build incredible data, predictive analytics systems, machine learning systems that were able to reimagine the default user experience. And I liken a lot of what we go through right now, like airport security. It's really guilty until proven innocent. And instead, most of us deserve TSA pre, right? We should just be vaulting right through. Most of us are good people, right? But right now, the internet is the opposite. So we see a massive, massive opportunity to transform that default experience. But it does require the organizational boundaries to be broken, the data silos to be broken, and then you can start having a holistic approach to trust and safety.
Right. That's true. But I think a lot of that also depends on what data every organization is collecting and how they want to use it. And sometimes you put in industry segments where the regulation comes in and they tell you, well, you cannot use this data for this particular purpose. And all of a sudden that data, that signal that is very valuable, Jason, to your point, gets lost.
Yeah, I think I worry that the lawmakers are not catching up in terms of their technical literacy. They need to get up to speed on how the internet actually works, how data is exchanged, what it's actually used for. I think when we saw Mark Zuckerberg go in front of Congress recently, the quality of the questions that were being asked by the U.S. Congress was embarrassing, in my opinion, as an engineer. And so I think, and I worry that the baby will be tossed out with the bathwater here, and we need to be more vigilant about carving out exceptions for things like fraud detection, fraud prevention, because what we do helps our customers survive. I think it's a noble purpose and one that privacy should be considerate of.
And just to add on top of that, at least in Brazil, you add all the friction at the beginning of the process, but when the transaction is denied, it's denied. So I was trying to rent a car here using my credit card, and for some reason my address didn't match. So my transaction got denied and my credit card got blocked. But if I had the opportunity of like taking a picture of my ID and a selfie, I would happily do that because it's already done, it's denied. So I need to do something to unlock the transaction and help. And because at least 3% of all the transactions in Brazil got denied, and there's not 3% of fraudsters. So you're losing like 2% of your whole transactions because you don't want to add a little bit of friction, and sometimes adding a little bit of frictions on the end of the process is better than adding no friction and deny the transaction.
No, and you bring up a good point, right? So anyone that's traveled internationally has gone through an experience like that, right? You go there, you buy something, swipe your credit card, it gets denied. You're like, okay, now where do I go get cash? I don't have it on me. And so this brings back the point that Jason, you were making, right? We start off treating everyone as a bad guy by default instead of flipping it the other way around. Because majority of the people that come in and want to do business with you have good intentions, right? They actually do want to do something useful with you, purchase something, buy something, apply for something. And we go take them through the entire same experience that we would have fraudster.
I just want to add, like, coming from a more engineering background, like I look at this problem, I'm scratching my head because if you look at email spam filters, right? Is there a human reading your email deciding whether it should go into the spam folder or not? Like, no, it just magically works. It's pretty darn accurate. Like, why is this industry so far behind that, right? Like, that's the bar that we should be setting for ourselves as an industry. Like, it should be like it just works, right? That's what technology can promise.
Right, right. And I think one of the utilities that we all use, our cell phones and the mobile networks, actually I think got some of that right? I mean, every time I land, I switch on my phone. I don't have to go through a full identification process. I just switch it on. I get on a network. They know exactly that I'm roaming. They know exactly where I am because they're routing calls to me. And they don't really care whether I'm in my home country, in my home city. I just get the connection. And they know exactly how to route all the data usage and the call usage back to my home network. And that's when I get that hefty bill, right? Whatever it is, $2 a second or something. So good conversation. I do want to bring in some of the perspectives that you guys have with your active products today to see how you're solving some of those challenges.
So actually, it's a really good point, right? So you mentioned you picked up your phone there. So everyone in this room has a mobile phone.
Yep.
And I think we talk a lot around products, but actually one of the things to make this success for all of us is collaboration. So we've got Mark in the audience, he works with the GSMA, and we mentioned around the telcos.
Yep.
So in the UK at the moment, everyone has a mobile phone, but actually a lot of banks actually use the telephone number to authenticate a customer. And fraudsters have now found ways to manipulate that, and actually things like SIM-swap and call divert. And that actually starts at the core of the telco's network. Fraudster can call up, set up a SIM-swap or a call divert, which then means that could be a Telefonica customer, but then they're also a victim of a banking fraud. So what the telcos have now done is actually said, let's work together. So we've got the likes of Callsign, we've got the GSMA, we've got the telcos, we've got banks, all working together to help tackle this problem. And it's very, very important. I think that's the key thing is we're all doing very, very good stuff in our own companies, but this collaboration is key. So kind of give you a flavour of what we've got now. So this type of fraud is out there. But actually now, if there is a SIM swap or a call divert detected, we would identify that and actually pass that back to the bank to say, we think this is suspicious. What we've now started to do is actually innovate. So again, everyone's got a phone in their pocket. So actually there's a lot of important or actually really good information there that can help identify a user. So we're really sort of touching the service on it now, and it's really exciting where we can go with it.
I'm gonna say 2 examples that we have in Brazil. The first one is we realized that the government was issuing fake identities. So real identities with fake data, because we have a corruption government and you can pay someone and they're gonna issue you a fake ID. So it doesn't matter how many times you're gonna check the ID, it's gonna be a valid ID, but with fake data. So basically we created a product that you're not blacklisting an ID that's doing fraud to you, you're blacklisting a face. And that's pretty basic, but this is important because most of the companies were trying to say, okay, this social security number or this name is banned from here, and they were keep having the same fraudster because they were not verifying the face. So this is something specifically that we did. And another thing we realized, and this is also crazy to say, but we realized that a lot of fraudsters were doing this inside a prison, or doing frauds sign-up process inside a prison. So basically, we got the geolocation of every prison in Brazil, and we correlated to the specific place where this request was coming from, and that helped us to avoid a lot of problems. So you just need to think regionally about what our problems are. Maybe you don't have these problems here in US, but we have this in Brazil. So you need to think about this and how you can connect the dots to avoid this kind of frauds.
So we have 3 core products. We have our payment protection, we have our account defense, which is fake accounts and account takeover, and then last but not least is content integrity. I'm most fascinated right now with our content integrity product. I think you are seeing headlines every week about Facebook and all the massive social networks just trying to keep up with the pace of really morally suspect or interesting borderline type content. Fun fact: Facebook's trying to hire 16,000 content moderators. And so the question I ask myself is, every business that doesn't have the bank account of Facebook, how are they going to keep up and survive the onslaught, right? It's not just Facebook that's suffering from people posting abusive content or content that doesn't belong. And so content is a space where the decision and the judgment is not often that black and white. It does require a human to kind of have that context, because machine learning systems are not yet that advanced to capture the nuance of what's going on in the world. YouTube recently, with this unfortunate New Zealand Christchurch shooting, this is YouTube, this is Google, like they're the machine learning company, the best of the best. They could only stop 75% of the 1,200 or so videos that were cloned videos of the live shooting that were uploaded in real time. 25% of those videos still went through, and that's the best machine learning company in the world. And so I'm asking myself, like, as everything moves online, content's going to follow, and how do all these businesses scale and keep up with the torrid pace of bad actors?
Now, that's a good point. So it's a good segue into, what are the trends? What do we see this evolving into? So as you said, you've got the most advanced company in machine learning and AI still being able to just prevent 25% or 30% of the people from uploading or having a fraudulent action. So what are the trends coming in the next 2 to 3 years? And I always stop at 2 to 3 because we don't know what's going to happen beyond that, right? We can come up with the next best mousetrap, and there's someone that's going to find a way through it. So let's probably limit ourselves to 2 to 3 years. And we were joking before we started this discussion, probably the next time I get in and I have to identify myself, it's probably going to be a DNA check or something else. Because that's what it's getting to right now. So Colin, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay. So basically, what we are doing in the 2 next years, we're actually creating an identity wallet where you upload all your IDs, proof of address, proof of income, and we can validate this in a single platform. And then you can do a single sign-on in many different places, and we already have 150 companies accepting that. So this is changing the way we interact with customers to do onboarding process. And of course, there is a point where an inflection point where you have all the users in the database and all the companies accepting it. So I believe that this is going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. But I think that there's a gap in the anti-fraud and many things, and that's important to say, the lack of diversity. And the lack of diversity leads to lack of inclusion in process. So I see a lot of companies working with face match process where you need to do eye tracking. How can a blind person do eye tracking? Right. So basically you don't have any blind person in your company and you don't know how that works. Right. And so we all know that face match process for Black people has a lower accuracy because all the algorithms are trained with white people. We also see that we know that transgender people has a lot of problems trying to open a bank account. Right. So I think that in the next 2 or 3 years, we need to evolve a lot with this challenge, bringing more diversity to the companies and developing more inclusive products. Right. And so it's not a big change, but I think that's a very important change because if you sum all of these people, it's a huge percentage of your customer base. So we need to take care of that and think about this.
Right. And so I think you're highlighting some of the stuff that Ryan said, right? So inclusion, pretty key, important thing to look after. And then collaboration, right? Because if I've got all this data, I'm loading this up somewhere, I've got to have people that trust in that data and are willing to actually use it. Otherwise, what's the point? I'm just creating another storage of some information, and I'm going to spend all this time and effort to secure it, keep it updated. But if no one uses it, so key point, Ryan.
Yeah, so there's a huge transition at the moment, especially in UK and Europe, around how customers are banking. So kind of government driven. So it's called strong customer authentication, like PSD2 regulation. So essentially what it means is that customers now have to go through more lengthy authentication in order to log in and make a payment. Yeah, we talk a lot around friction and user experience, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. So kind of where Callsign come in is we've got a lot more intelligence around the user. So if we know more about who you are and your identity, then let's give that customer a slick customer journey. So that could be a push notification, it could be a swipe on your phone, or you could then do a step up like a facial biometric. So that's kind of what's happening at the moment. But then where we're then going to start moving to is, we're all talking the last couple of days around identity. So what I'm kind of thinking at the moment is it's really interesting that we're in the room and we understand why we're doing this. So when we're talking about self-sovereign, so I can then control my identity, or other companies will control my identity. We get it and we know why we're doing it. And it is a huge benefit. I'm all for it. But what do consumers like my mum think of that? It's a whole new mindset, right? It's a paradigm shift in the way we're going to all start thinking about identity. But we need these people to be on board, because firstly, it's going to be really beneficial for all of us. My mum is an example. But if I start talking to her about, mum, you can then reuse your identity across your telco if you want to get a phone contract out, or you want to buy something online. She needs to understand that is going to happen. But there's also a flip side to it, because if we don't educate them around who's owning this, if it is the government driving this, then it's also an opportunity for the fraudster. Because if now I know that other companies have got access to my identity, then that's an opportunity for the fraudster to jump on the back of. I spoke earlier around social engineering. So if I'm a fraudster and I know that other companies now have control of people's identity, then I'll just call the customer up and say, I'm calling from this brand new identity company. I'm controlling your identity. Give me a bit more information and I can help you. Right. So we really need to educate our consumers. So as I say, I think we've got some fantastic ideas around how we productize all of these identity products. But we need to make sure our consumers are on board, because it's going to benefit them, but also there could be a risk there.
Right. Yeah. And if you look at this from a consumer adoption perspective, right? Consumer education is very, very important. If the consumer doesn't know what's going on, and suddenly you create this aura that you're going to have more security and they need to provide X, Y, and Z pieces of information, and they don't get it, the knee-jerk reaction is going to be, I'm not going to use this. I don't understand it. I'm too scared. So consumer adoption and consumer education pretty much go hand in hand, right? And I agree with you. I think it is going to get to a point where you've got to really give the consumer control. With all of the regulation coming in, GDPR, I know we've got regulation coming in California, and I think it's going to start showing up in other states as well. The consumer wants to be in control, but the question that all of us struggle with is, does the consumer know what control means? Do they understand what they're controlling? Do they know what is the repercussion of that control not being used properly?
Yeah, I think we need to improve the technical and data literacy for the average citizen and the lawmaker. Right. Just as a global, society, I think we are far behind of where things are today, and so there's a lot catching up. I just wanted to add 2 quick points.
Sure.
What I think about over the next 2-3 years, one is that we are moving towards a post-breach world. Data breaches are going to continue to happen with increasing frequency and magnitude. And as data continues to get passed around through APIs and whatnot services between different businesses, we fall to the standard of the weakest link in the chain. Whatever business is least security minded and least trained and least aware in their employee base and their best practices is going to get breached. And it's going to keep happening over and over because these hackers are relentless, right? They know the value of this data. And so what I don't have a good answer to, but I do think about is what happens in a post-breach world when I can easily get any of your social security numbers like that, right? And so I think shifting identity from one that was static and black and white, hey, you correctly provided the right social security number, to probabilistic, right? We are shifting to a probabilistic identity world where it's not just 0 or 1, it's 0.10, 0.50% of chance of probability of being who you say you say you are. And then the second thing I think a lot about is, and we just see this ourselves at Sift, but these fraudsters are often very technically savvy. There's the low-hanging fruit, which are like the script kiddies and the amateurs. But I'm most concerned about these organized crime rings that are highly motivated financially to hire software engineers in Eastern Europe, wherever in the world, Asia. And these people are going into an office every day, and they have a full suite of SaaS software tools that allow them to create fake phone numbers from anywhere in the world, to spin up virtual machines from anywhere in the world, to just do whatever we do as software companies, but on the flip side. And I mean, it's a fascinating, adversarial problem. That's part of why I like my job. But it's also scary. It's scary to know that every piece of technology that is built has that duality. And I quote Uncle Ben from Spider-Man here: "With great power comes great responsibility." Right? Like every single piece of software has that.
Right. And I think a lot of the standard identity and fraud checks that we have in place today, to your point, is built on static data, right? You're checking my name and my address and my social and my email address. But if the data is out there, then what value does the static piece of information provide to me, right? Because anybody who has my name and address and email address, I think you can just do a reverse lookup. Just type anyone's name and you'll pretty much find out where they live, where they work. And so when you call in, like this is funny. I had an incident with a cable company. I called them to upgrade my service, and literally the lady asked me to verify my name and address. And my first reaction, being in this space, is, really, that's all you need? Like, what if it wasn't me? Well, that's okay. I'm like, no, it should not be, right? You got to have more checks, because what you're doing, even though it's a very small thing, you're increasing someone's financial liability with you, and that person can walk away and say, that wasn't me, and you're going to have to eat the loss. You start multiplying that by 1 million people trying to do that, all of a sudden it's a number worth looking at. So yeah, shifting away from that static data, whether it's me walking up there and showing you my ID, and you're hoping that the guy on the other side is good enough to detect a fake ID versus a real ID. Yeah, there's too much human element of error built in there.
Just to add in as well on that, so yeah, we're talking about credentials, and credentials are always going to be there. I've got name and address, and there's paperwork about me, and that's why it's important around the layering. So
Correct.
What is unique to me to help identify myself? That's where we're going when we talk about biometrics. That is very unique to me. But your challenge there, which you need to be mindful of, is what is the enrollment process for that?
Correct.
That's the key behind it, because if I'm a fraudster and I enroll Ryan Gosling as a user, then of course when we see fraudster log in again, it's Ryan. So you need to make sure that registration process is absolutely that individual, because that's the keys to the kingdom, right? So you get that right as a user, then of course you have a really good user experience. But if you get it wrong, essentially you're just then allowing that fraudster then log in to that person every time.
Yeah, and it's a tough problem to solve, because you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And once people get in, how do you build in the right controls so you can isolate that instance? Because people will still get in, right? A username password will still get stolen. Someone's digital identity at some point may still end up in the wrong hands. So what do you do very quickly to detect that and isolate it so you can limit the exposure? And I think that's where some of the stuff that I'm sure all of us are looking at is not only doing that static check at the point of the transaction, but then what information can you bring in as to what that consumer did? And what was the end result of that interaction? Was it good? Was it bad? You can bring that in and start creating a behavioral profile of that consumer, right? And you can put in whatever technology on it, AI or machine learning or whatever the case may be, but that becomes a pretty strong signal.
Yeah, and what we noticed as well with some of our clients, so they're actually now passively picking up information all the time. So when a customer uses the mobile app and I want to make a payment, they're actually moving around some of the buttons that they've got. in order to then get more biometrics around the user. My thumb size is different to everyone in this room, right? And also the way I hold my phone, I can have left hand, right hand. That's all information around the user that you can actually start using in order to authenticate. But it's really interesting now that because of that passive information, banks are now thinking about, well, actually, if I change the user experience slightly, I can then actually get more information around the user. So they're kind of really now starting to adopt to the benefits of things like biometrics and uniqueness.
Right. I mean, it's all about coming up with that next crafty thing that you can use, that next signal that you can use to be predictive around this is the right person or the wrong person. So Jason, I'll let you talk to them about the Apple Card that we were just speaking about just before we started this. Apple launched a credit card on Monday. Was it Monday or Tuesday? I forget.
Yeah, I mean, we were just chatting before, and I was fascinated by the idea that some of these larger tech companies are entering spaces that they haven't before, but they bring some new novel technology at scale. So with Apple, the new credit card, you can research it yourself too. But one of the interesting features is that there's no credit card number. And then Lincoln was saying that in Brazil, this is kind of the standard already. And so I was like scratching my head, wow, the US is behind just as usual. But there's no credit card number, and then they're generating one-time codes tied to your phone because there's a very secure authentication piece of hardware on your phone. That's a really interesting play from an ecosystem perspective where, they're taking advantage of the fact that people have iPhones, and then they can go up the stack vertically to do some interesting things like a credit card, right? And there's some other cool features where they'll show you where you made the purchase because they have geolocation on your phone when you do things like Apple Pay, and so it will help reduce the chargeback rate because people will recognize more of their charges.
Well, and I think Apple's probably got the right consumer base and weight to convince the payment processors to change the way they do stuff as well, right? Because typically all the legacy systems are reliant on that static credit card number, right? And I had my bank issued me a new card, and they were talking about how it's really secure. And I was like, all you really did is you removed the number from the front of the card and put it on the back of the card. How is that more secure? Person's still going to get to that number. It's still static. They can still use it for an online purchase. And then you cross your fingers and hope some algorithm figures out that this wasn't me, or that I'll get a call in the middle of the night saying, hey, is someone using your card?
And just to add a little bit on that, and also link to the user education, we're from Brazil, so we're, I think, more educated about fraud in credit cards. So it's pretty standard for you. You don't give your credit card to someone and they takes it back to somewhere in the restaurants, and they're gonna bring you the check back. Right. So I was impressed by this fact here in US. It's pretty common. No, you're gonna pay, and you're gonna keep your eye on the credit card, and you're gonna type your PIN every time you want to do a transaction. And there is no such thing as, okay, I'm gonna bring your credit card to the back of the store, and then I'm gonna give you back. So it's different things. Like, you need technology and user education, because if you don't have the POS with the technology of accepting the PIN and bringing it to the table, it doesn't matter how well educated you are about fraud. Right. You still have nothing to do. Like, right. I come to US and there's nothing I can do. I can just accept that fact that I'm not gonna use the credit card the way I use in Brazil.
We wanted to do EMV, but we didn't want to do everything around it, right? So we just kind of took that number and put it on that chip and said we're done. Whereas I think, I've been to the UK and I'm from India. So every time you go to India, you use your credit card, they bring the machine to you. You don't just hand it over and the guy walks away and 10 minutes later he comes back. Probably he's got a car full of stuff that he bought on your card and you didn't even know about it. So good conversation. I know we've got about 4 minutes left. So I did want to give the audience here some time to ask any questions. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think false positives still happen even pre-probabilistic identity. Yeah. So we just need to have escalation paths so that you can, maybe talk to a human and then provide more information so that it increases your chance. I think there's probabilistic identity as identified by algorithms, and then, that's not going to be the end all solution. You have to have backup systems in case the algorithms are imperfect, which they often are. Machine learning is so far from a level of accuracy where we can operate like email spam filters, generally do.
I'll just add on that as well. So I think one of the things that we've been able to help a lot of our clients with is kind of almost policies. So it's a great point, right? Around I could have fat fingers, I could be using a different device and things like that. So you're always going to have false positives, but it's essentially how you manage that. Rather than just going to the customer, sorry, go away, go to a branch. It's, well, let's actually orchestrate another user journey. So if we're unsure if it's right, let's ask them something else. And allowing customers to be able to develop that.
I think that the equivalent here is like, let's say you lost your passport and driver's license tomorrow, and you have a flight to catch to go back to wherever you came from. The airport security is going to, it's tenuous, but you're going to get on the plane if you get there with enough time and answer all the questions and all the paperwork that they force you to do. I don't know I've luckily never had to do that, but I know there is a process for people who don't have that document.
You're not encouraging anyone to try that today, right? For most of you going back, yeah. Don't just go up to TSA and say, sorry, I don't have any ID. Any other questions? I know everyone's pretty exhausted. It's been 2 long days and we're talking about fraud and identity again. So you're probably wanting to hear something else later this evening or, when you get back home. So again, I want to thank Jason, Ryan, and Colin for their time. And thank you guys all to sit here and participate in this discussion. And safe travels to everyone going back today. Or if you're staying back, enjoy Vegas for one more day or for however long you can. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.